All right, so the tool I'm going to show you today is called Made, and I just have a couple of slides to give you like a little background. So Made is a tool that helps tenants who are facing eviction. I don't know how many of you have seen the MLRI forms that have been around for a long time. It looks like maybe you're all a little bit newer, but they're packets that you can flip through, and it's what people do in our traditional clinic at GBLS for a long time.
Okay,
Yeah, the answer and discovery forms. Okay.
Yeah.
MLRI is the organization that made them.
Okay.
Yeah. Or at least they're the editor, because people all around the state have contributed. So what Made is essentially something that I call clinic in a box. It replaces or supplements or enhances the clinic that we have at GBLS. The idea is that somebody can go through all of the forms on their own, on a smartphone or a desktop computer, and get something as close as we can to the same experience that they would have had if they were in our clinic. So it produces 7 forms that are kind of the key forms that we use all the time in the clinic setting. They're the same forms that we've used for a long time, so they're edited and well vetted. Someone can use it completely self-guided. And a really important thing, I think, is that it includes this kind of automated follow-up and reminders. Actually, I'm realizing just for the recording, I probably should change the display settings. So let me do that. Okay. And it includes links to the law and other information, including things like videos, text, and it's all aimed at a 6th grade reading level is the goal. This is kind of how, for a long time, our clinic has operated. We've had these different kinds of sources where people get referred to come to the clinic. So you all work at the phone intake and triage level of that. We've also gotten people who've referred us to for eviction help, social service partners. So that includes like elder service agencies like Home Start that just provide financial help. And then there's the community intake sources. So I've worked at Rosie's Place 1 day a week for the last few years doing that. We also do outreach through the Asian Outreach Unit does a lot of this, where they have community intakes throughout Boston to serve different kinds of populations that might not normally walk in our door. But in practice, in each of those 3 settings, really all roads have led to our eviction clinic on Mondays. And the reason for that is the forms themselves, they cover everything, but they're very long. Not every question applies to everybody, but if you're going to sit through it in a clinic setting, you generally have to go through all of the questions. And it just isn't possible to spend 4 hours with somebody when you're doing an intake and you have a number of people waiting to get the next person help. Another kind of related problem is that people don't always know that they have a legal problem. They may not think of their eviction as being something that has a legal solution. So here's some things that might relate to people with different types of housing problems. They think of it as an income problem. They lost their job. They know their landlord won't fix the heat. They may not think of that as a legal problem. Or they're being abused, and that could result in an eviction. As a result, in all these kind of scenarios, they may not start by going to legal aid. And that's something that I think is a big problem, at least something that I call the referral loop. Right? So people might spend a lot of time going from place to place, and then finally when they find the right resource, they've taken off maybe a couple of days of work to be on the phone or to walk in person somewhere to get certain kind of help. And then for that next missing piece, the critical legal help that they would need, they might have to take another day off of work. So a 4-hour clinic, that's generally what it's been at GBLS in our clinic setting. It just doesn't work for everybody. You can probably imagine people who are parents who have kids that they're taking care of. They need to arrange for childcare. Maybe they can't afford that, or maybe they just can't do that. I had a client who I was helping at Rosie's Place who was signed up for our clinic at GBLS. I asked her, well, why are you here instead of at the regular clinic? She had 2 kids that she was with. There's no childcare provided at her clinic. She didn't have childcare because her abuser, who was also her landlord, was the person who had cut her off financially. And so she didn't have any other options besides going to a place that's more community service oriented, like Rosie's place, to get help. And thanks to using this tool, I was actually able to help her a lot faster than we would have been able to in the past. So it was practical for us to help her there. Another use case, which I actually didn't really even think of when I built this tool, is there are a number of people who are homebound. If you think about, you probably have these phone calls, right? Someone's like, I can't get to court. I can't leave my house. So we had 2 people we helped just in the first month who that was their scenario. They can use something like this at their home. That's another way for them to get more access to the court. So in both of the scenarios that I was thinking of, the tenant ultimately got a reasonable accommodation and was able to work things out to get to court on time in a way that made sense, but they really couldn't have taken off figured out how to get here and then also to the court. A lot of people in that scenario have some kind of social service provider, a social worker who can go out to their house and help them and visits them. You can't expect them to go through legal forms, but using a tool like this that's self-guided, they can provide the technology that lets the person do it and get it printed and get it delivered on time. This is what those forms look like. The original paper forms. So there's like about 300 questions. That some of them are easier than this, but in theory, these are supposed to be usable and answerable by someone who is not a lawyer. In practice, you're not going to be able to answer the question on your own. Was the notice to quit defective? Was my tenancy properly terminated? Those are just questions that mean that the paper forms were essentially useless for the pro se scenario unless there's someone helping walk through it. There just are not enough lawyers to cover everybody's needs. So my goals in building MADE these were kind of the things that I kept at top of mind, thinking about respecting tenants' time. We're shifting some work from an attorney to the tenant, so we have to really be thinking about how we're using the time and make sure it's respectful with that time. To have it be accessible, so that is both for people with different types of disabilities and different reading comprehension levels. And to go beyond the paper forms and not just replicate that process, but think of what's the value add that we can have. So one thing that this system does is it will send people out reminders for the next step in their process by text or email, and they'll be reminded of when to go to court as well. Our clinic, when we're using this tool, is really cut down from 4 hours to about an hour and a half. So it's been a tremendous efficiency. When I'm helping somebody one-on-one, it takes between 20 and 30 minutes. So that's something that's probably a common way to use this still, is with the lawyer's help. And that used to take about an hour. Here's one scenario. I mentioned the homebound tenant. So when they're using MADE, they may not be able to do it on their own, but this is an assistive tool for social service workers as well. So they can get that help at home with an advocate, and the advocate can help them do that last step of getting it delivered in a way that somebody who is not a trained lawyer might not have felt comfortable just with those difficult questions. They can use a tool like this that breaks it down step by step. We're at about 100 to a little bit more users a month right now. I'm hoping to still expand it through more outreach. We got some funding to help, particularly in that area. But overall, there's a lot more people than we're helping in our clinic before, just with that first initial step where we haven't done a lot of promotion yet. And I'm going to demo you the tool, and feel free to ask questions. We're obviously a small group, so it doesn't have to be too formal. MADE is available in 6 different languages. Yeah, it was only 2 until recently. So the city gave us some money to do the translation. So we have all 6 languages. The whole system is translated into. And I want to translate it again.
It won't turn out very well.
So, yeah. And in most of the languages, not all of them, there's also this text-to-speech feature.
Massachusetts Defense for Eviction Language English.
So like, if we tried, I know Portuguese, Spanish, Vietnamese, I think those all should work, but. And that's something that just came from like trying this out with people and getting their feedback. So obviously people who are blind, they may have a screen reader, but there are a lot of people who aren't blind but have low literacy levels. So this is a way to assistive tool for them. Yeah.
Portuguese?
It is Brazilian Portuguese is what we chose. Yeah. So we were trying to think about how to capture the biggest number of people in Greater Boston, especially because the funding came from the city. And we landed on Portuguese because there's Brazilian Portuguese is the biggest language population. And then that's going to be comprehensible by Portuguese speakers from Portugal. And it's going to be at least relatively accessible for Cape Verdean speakers as well, because they're taught Portuguese in school. If we had money, we would have probably loved to also have Cape Verdean, but there's some challenges with that in terms of like the written language versus the spoken language, and it was the simplest solution was to stick with Brazilian Portuguese. So I'm just going to switch back. Sorry, a little bit of a delay here. Okay. I switched to our other server. This still takes too long. And this is on our development server just so we don't change the statistics. Yeah, start over. And if I can't, I will just go ahead and run it on the production server. So.
Oh, you don't want to do that because that'll make like a false entry basically in this.
Yeah, it's not a big deal for just doing it.
Yeah, I suppose.
This is going a little slower than it normally should too. Okay. All right, well, this is at the end, which we're not going to do. Let's go ahead and reset that. All right. Throughout the tool, like I said, there are different types of help available. So there's these pop-ups where people can click on words they don't understand, and those can include images to let them see what they're looking for. There's also a help button on some pages with like help specific to that screen that's more just a general help. And what we try to do is balance like how many words are on the screen versus how much was hidden away, because some people wanted to know everything and some people wanted to know almost nothing. They would get really scared and intimidated or bogged down in the details if they had a really long explanation to read through before they get to the question. These videos, Massachusetts Law Reform Institute made for us. So just show you like the first.
This video is an overview of the evictions process in Massachusetts. The most important thing to know about evictions in Massachusetts is a landlord must take you to court if he wants to move you out of your apartment.
And there are about 6 of these throughout for different screens where we thought people would need help.
Did they make the video specifically for this, or did they get put up on Mass Legal Help and then sort of both, I guess?
So that first one actually was already made.
Okay.
They made, I think it was 5 new ones that were made for this, but they made them general purpose so that they could be used for other things too.
Huh?
There is a game. They didn't make the game for this project. That's a whole different thing. They got a grant to do.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's cool. That's super cool.
Let me just show you like some of the protections we have. So you might have run into this where someone says, I'm being evicted. Like, but should I schedule them for clinic? Maybe not, if they just have a notice to quit. And if they miss their court date, maybe they could still do, is everyone able to read that okay? I can look like okay. Maybe they're still able to use the system, but maybe they shouldn't. But this is kind of the default that we have. We had to balance the language so it's acceptable to the court too. So like this, I think should be a lot shorter if we could make it shorter, but we had to make sure the language was acceptable to everybody and there wasn't any problems with the court accepting it. And jury trials are a sensitive issue with the courts. If you're logged in, that's how I'm logged in as the system administrator, then you can get your information is going to be automatically filled, just your name. So like you can log in, for example, with a Facebook or that's the only social login we have right now. Let's see. To show you what that's like if you wanted to sign up. Yeah, so you can either use your phone or a Facebook account right now, or just type in an email address, whatever you wanted, whatever you felt most comfortable with. But if you do use a Facebook account, it'll copy over your name and fill that in there. Some pictures where we could, so we could zoom in on the right part of the form for people to copy information over. This address auto-completion tool here is a way to help reduce errors. And it was actually, we didn't write the website technology from scratch. We're using an existing platform that's made for this kind of tool. And this particular address feature was built for us to use. As I said, you can get reminders automatically. So just we'll prompt you again for your phone number and email if you didn't provide those. It's a little dated now, maybe, but I still enjoy that.
Oh yeah,
Not
I
if
saw
you're
the
old
last
like me.
one said Moby Monkey or whatever.
Yeah,
Or I
yeah.
don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but
Yes, Tobias.
it's Arrested Development.
Yeah, it is Arrested
I never
Development.
watched much of it, but I know enough to get that it's from there.
So one of the ways, like I said, trying to respect time of the user is just if they told us the name of their landlord, we could probably guess a little bit about what kind of landlord it is. So we try to do that here. They said their landlord is a housing authority, so we know that's part of the name. We know it's probably a housing authority. But they need the ability to change it and override it if that's wrong. And like one of the ways to simplify the questions from the paper form is this relates here to like 3 different parts of the paper forms, what kind of landlord you have. But we don't necessarily have to explain that to the tenant who's doing this on their own. They just need to be asked for the basic facts that help us figure out how to fill out the forms correctly for them. And that information is kind of in the help link here if they want to see a little bit more about what that means.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
Just based on the last screen, the option that the landlord lives in the same building as me.
Mhm.
So will this tool be able to differentiate whether it's rooming housing or just a multi-unit home?
So the reason for that prompt is mostly about 93A. So whether they could have the protection of 93A. If your landlord lives in the same building as you and there's really anything less than 6 units, then they're probably not a commercial landlord and you can't apply 93A to that landlord. So that's really all we're trying to figure out and just kind of guide them to the right choices based on what they say. This court is automatically chosen based on what their geographic location is. So they gave us their address, we know what courts cover it, and so we can do that. Let's say that my landlord didn't file it in the Eastern Housing Court, and instead they went through, let's see, Roxbury Division, Boston Municipal Court. We just tell them about their transfer rights right away. And again, we know which court they should be able to transfer it to, so we tell them here. And this will let you put in dates that don't necessarily make sense, actually, because sometimes people might be using it for different purposes. We didn't want to restrict them too much there. But they get told the new court date, because this is going to do discovery and an answer for them. So they get a 2-week delay. And this actually is smart enough to handle holidays. So let's say that their first court date was going to be 12/25 instead of 12/31. Oh, sorry. Actually, I want to work 2 weeks backwards. Yeah. So it knows about holidays, including weird ones like Patriots Day that are only Massachusetts holidays. The courts are actually closed.
Oh, it does keep track of that too. Okay, that's
Yeah.
yeah. I was going to say because that one's not going to be. I guess it's a Massachusetts tool, so that makes sense, doesn't it? Did you have to code in Patriots Day, or did you just consider there like some sort of?
There's like a
database of
library we could
Boston,
use.
like,
Yeah.
holidays or Massachusetts holidays.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Well, I had to actually take out bunker,
Another-
or what was it? Yeah, bunker evacuation day, because that's not a holiday anymore.
Oh.
Where the courts
Oh,
are
but it
closed.
was in the.
It was still in that
the
library. Yeah.
Okay. That's
So this is follow-up here based on what they say. So they get told about what kind of rights they have in a non-payment case versus a fault case. And let's say that they said it's a no-fault case. They get a little follow-up. And this relates really only to the kind of discovery questions that we could ask them for them. We go through some of these. There's obviously a lot of questions. Like I said, it's up to 300, but they're only shown the ones that are relevant. So this is one of the techniques to narrow it down. So we'll have some follow-ups for them if they answer certain of these in the affirmative. So like if they say that they have disability, then we're going to be able to do some different kinds of options for them. Here again, like there's a whole bunch of follow-up questions that we don't have to ask them about unless they say it. So let's say that they said the security deposit. They didn't pay prepaid last month's rent. They're going to get a follow-up just about that one thing and not have to answer all those other questions. Try to keep the questions short, specific, with only one question in a question. Sometimes it's hard for lawyers to not ask compound questions.
yeah, because that whole thing is basically answers is the notice to quit defective or not, right?
Yes,
That's sort of all of the components of whether it is or not.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that,
And we focus on the common ones, but there's this catch-all here, which is really only going to be used by a lawyer, but that's one of the use cases, someone who's a lawyer who's still going to save time by using this tool. And same with this, like that's a complicated question on the paper form, like is your summons and complaint defective or not? But we can break it down into the actual common facts that could lead to that being done correctly. This is the common one. People just get one copy of the summons and it's left at their door, not handed to them in person. So that's defective, and we don't have to ask them, is your summons and complaint defective, to figure that out. These are some of the more of the facts that fall in there. But I won't go through all of the screens because this isn't really about that, but you can see here, people like to have feedback and know what's happening and have a sense of their progress on the form. And we can reflect back to people what it means, what they've just put in. And these are some of the defenses that this particular tenant might have based on the answers that they've given, which we had to tone down a little bit from what we wanted to say at first. Again, thinking of acceptability for all of the different users and scenarios that we'd want it to be used. This is one of the most common types of defenses, so we could have buried this in a little checklist where they had to say, I have bad conditions. We wanted to ask everybody and have them all see the full list of common problems that they might have in their home.
Or possible problems.
Possible
Yeah,
problems.
Like this could be a problem you could bring up, kind of idea, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. They had some problems with heat and hot water. They get this follow-up only if they've said they have problems, which is how did they tell their landlord about the problems. And same with the repair and deduct. That's a really narrow defense that doesn't apply to very many people. And if they don't have any bad conditions, it would definitely not apply, so we can simplify it for them that way. I said that I was disabled, so it's going to automatically suggest that I might have a defense based on my disability. Here, I already answered some questions about bad conditions, so it knows there are problems with heat and hot water and problems with bad conditions. So it doesn't have to ask me those again, although on the paper form, you'd have to really, there's no way to say, because this is checked, this is also checked. Here's what the follow-up screen looks like. So I think on the paper form, it does list these, but they have to be listed as statements that are made towards the court. We can break them down in a way that makes a little bit more sense. But it's always a continual improvement process, so we could probably make these even simpler. But I really focused on iteration and getting something in the hands of people to test it and learn more about it, rather than having a perfect version of like 300 questions all in one go.
So is there a way that anybody would actually ever get asked all 300 questions, or is it really just because there's so many permutations? Like, is there actually a way through the decision tree that would get you to every question? I wouldn't think so.
Some of them are contradictory, so yeah.
So I would think that if you're A, then you're not B, and therefore you'll never get B. So it's 300 questions, but you never actually would have to do that many.
Right, but in the clinic,
I'm sure there's some
on
that are
paper,
still quite
you might have to.
Yeah, on the paper one, yeah.
It might be possible to get almost all the questions, actually, because I mean, I'm thinking most of them aren't contradictory. It's really uncommon to have all of them. And like one of the biggest time savers is if somebody has a fault case, they can't raise counterclaims. And previously, they would have had to, oh, I should actually show you this. No, I guess not. Okay, just want to show you how like this is like, we're almost done. Hang in there, you're just about ready to finish. And that was something we found tenants really needed too. But yeah, what I was going to say is some cases are just a lot fewer defenses that the tenant can raise, and they can get really overwhelmed having to sit through the whole clinic when those just don't apply to them. If they have a really short, simple case. So one of the big time savers, like I said, we have the answer form, we have the discovery form. We already have all the information we need to do both of those, but on paper, you'd have to fill them out one at a time. And this actually automatically fills in tailored discovery requests for that user's case. So they could choose to change them if they want. We didn't really focus on making that super pretty, because we don't think probably tenants should ever need to do that. It's more for an attorney helping a tenant. They can add or subtract questions. But these are all specific to this tenant's case. So this happens to be a touchscreen laptop. So a big time saver for us in the clinic is the fact that the tenant can sign it electronically before the copies are made. So you can just print out collated and stapled sets.
Once.
Just one time.
Yeah,
Yep. Yes. Potentially, at least. Yeah. So I don't know what kind of phone everyone has, but this is another way for someone to sign it. If they're working on a desktop, they want to sign it on their smartphone, they can do that. So on my phone, I can just get to the camera and point it at that code, and I get a link that pops up. So you could try it if you want also.
You can text it to your phone too, right? Like
You can also text it to your phone, yeah. And that works really no matter what kind of phone you have. So like newer iPhones have that feature.
Yeah.
Most Androids have it.
I know about just have to like
if you're running,
focus it on your camera.
and if you're
Yeah.
running the most recent operating system.
The older versions didn't have, I
Well,
think,
13 had it.
QR code.
I mean, I have it, but it's not actually Android. But yeah, I think it was like in,
It should like pop up a little link for you, I think, is the way it
Yeah.
should work.
yeah, and then you have to tap the link. Oh, that's so good. We were doing that last week.
I'll just go ahead and sign it on the screen, actually. So I'll show you what that looks like quickly. So,
Already this should look a little familiar. This is the same. He was testing the SSA overpayment.
oh,
And everybody's got to test it sometime soon. No rush.
Mine is the Nicholas Cage one.
So we put in some dates that don't make a lot of sense. But let's say we had said our case was had to be filed today. They wouldn't see this option to deliver it by mail because it wouldn't make sense.
That's all it takes that option.
Yeah. But let's say we're going to mail it because we have until December 30th. Plenty of time.
Carrier pigeon if you want.
Or butterfly.
Actually, if it's in the city, carrier pigeon would probably be faster than mail anyway. That's same day
Most things
delivery.
come the same next day. That's what I usually
Pigeon
find.
or butterfly. I thought it was what kind of bird is this?
Okay, so this is asking me there's still some things that could be refined a little bit, I guess. So this is something it only needed because I said we're transferring the case. It doesn't normally need the landlord's address. So it's saying actually, hey, I still need this one more piece of information. Yeah, I'll just let you see what the ending screen looks like and what the forms look like. So,
Yes, these are just like.
Wow, she's a ghost.
so they get a full set of all the forms. And this video is this is where we found actually a lot of people were having problems before. They've started it, but how do I actually get
I feel good.
to do what I want?
All
Something.
my defenses to this eviction in my answer. Now what do I do with it?
Your answer needs to be served.
Does Mariah work at BLP now? Or I think she did before.
Mariah,
Jennings Ramsey. She's the one who made these. She used to be at BLP.
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know of Mariah.
Okay. I think she's at MLRI
No.
focusing more on these kind of things in the websites project. So they could watch that video, which tells them what actually do I really need to do. For now, the only way to get this to the court is to print it out and hand deliver it, or use your own e-file account. There's no way to integrate the two yet.
So
But I'm hoping that eventually,
download the form and then you file it yourself. Kind of okay.
so I'm hoping eventually that we'd be able to integrate those two, to have people skip the printing step.
Be able to connect that account and just file it directly from me.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we'd be taking more responsibility for them, but it might be really helpful. Anyway, so they get this cover sheet, which is customized to them, and it says things like their court date. I said that it was a no-fault case, but if I had said it was a non-payment of rent case, they'd get information about applying for raft. Just really the basic information. Everything has to be on this one page.
And is this something that they could go back to? Like if they had closed this, could they go back or would they just start over?
Great question. They could go back to it. So they can go ahead and change any of the information they've already put in at any point.
So like if they didn't have access to a printer at that point, they could just kind of close it, a few days later, open it back up.
Do you have to have an account for that?
You
Or
don't.
does it
You
just have to be the same browser. Which is everything.
They could use this link here under the menu to share it.
Oh,
So
and
they
that
can
saves
email
you.
themselves the link or text it to their phone. I want to show you, like, the other thing is you might have someone who's using it. I'm not sure how you all will use it, if you'll just tell people about it or if you'll use it with a tenant. But if you were, maybe you don't speak their language, so you want to switch it to English at the end. So you can do that at any point from this menu here. A lot of these are only here because I'm the administrator, but they'd be able to see these things, review their answers, share it, and change the language. Those are the three options they would see.
I suppose.
Sign in and sign out too, yeah.
But yeah.
So that's it. That's how it works. Any other questions? Probably maybe about like where or when you should use it. I guess you should probably talk with Chris about that. But my guess is like probably like the big thing is you can tell people about this. There's no income limits. They can use it anywhere in the state. So for those kind of referrals, obviously, where you wouldn't send it down to us, that would be how to do it.
I was like sort of guessing how we would use it. I was thinking if they qualify for GPLS, but I didn't think there's no income requirement for this. It's just a free online resource. So.
Exactly. Yeah. So
yeah, really, if they live in Boston.
Yeah, and you can always let people know about it, of
Right,
course. We're not stopping our clinic. Some of the clinics are using this. Some are still using the paper form. This is another option for someone who couldn't make it to clinic or couldn't make it on time. So
Or
they can do it
doesn't
whenever they
qualify.
need to. Well, and definitely who doesn't
That would be.
qualify.
I think that would be the biggest thing, or not biggest, but like when somebody doesn't is like over income, for example, could still tell them about this.
Or if our clinic was full
Yeah.
and they couldn't possibly make it to the
Yeah.
next week. Because we try to rebook people. It can't always happen. The clinic still has value that's separate from this. Like there's no motions that occur in this. So like maybe that they'd have a good motion to dismiss. This does not help someone with that scenario. It only helps them with things that are like harder to say really a lawyer needs to do.
But you use this in clinic anyway. So
Yeah.
like for the things that aren't like that, for example. So
Yep.
So really the biggest one for us, I guess, would be when somebody either can't make it to clinic because homebound, like the example you gave, or doesn't qualify.
Yeah, or out of service area, I guess. For the most one. I don't know how often you get those calls that they get through and get all the way to you or not.
I was gonna say,
All the time?
All
You have to answer those. Okay. All right. Well, there you go.
It's like, I'm in Pennsylvania. It's like, oh.
The best is you're in Florida, but I swear my issues in Massachusetts. And then you're like, okay, what's your zip code? You're like, in New York zip code. Just pretending for Massachusetts.
That's not how it is.
Well, yeah, this is fantastic. This is great.
So, in terms of